This is Novelty Generators, a podcast focused on growth, creativity, and philosophy. I'm Niles Heckman and can be found at philosophicalphotography.com and nilesheckman.com. This evening, I'm here with Jonathan Mozenter and Mike Sullivan, who are back on the podcast. And I'm very conscious to actually mention Jonathan first, because last time I mentioned Mike first. And it's always this thing I'm interested in looking at, because I've been on projects with people where it's always one person's name before the other person's name. To throw rubbish hierarchy out of the window, I'm always conscious to just shake things up and mix it up and always like welcome back reoccurring guests to the podcast without always putting one person's name in front of the other. So it's good to see you guys both back here. It's always a pleasure to have deep conversations with both of you.
Hey, Niles. Good to be back.
That was
Thanks
Mike.
for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Niles. It's always an honor and pleasure and fun to chat with you, man. Looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, and that was Jonathan. So you guys are people that I always really enjoy talking with. We were just chatting before the conversation started about friendships, and conscious relationships are just such a recharge to your batteries when you have good conversations with people. And how much it just really kind of fuels your creative juices and puts wind in your sails after you have juicy back and forths with people that you can really talk to things that you're interested about with fellow human beings. One thing that we were going to focus on tonight, we were kind of bouncing around what our subject matter would be, because with the three of us, there's a billion things we could talk about. But just to kind of simplify and kind of solidify, I was thinking that we would have a nice conversation about like various things that have influenced us, especially in terms of prose. Because I'm sure as we do more of these conversations, we can always go down various different paths, but to keep it on somewhat of a track this evening, both of you guys, we've oftentimes talked about like various things that we've read in books that have influenced us. So I know that tonight we kind of each are going to hint on certain books that have been really influential in our kind of processes along the way in our growth processes. And we'll just kind of go over, a small amount each. But do you want to maybe dive in initially first, Mike, as to what might have been a book that really kind of helped awaken your eyes to something at some level of your life, or just kind of open something up for you? And then we'll just kind of bounce back and forth from each of us as we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can break the ice here. I mean, the way I thought about this is I recounted chronologically what blew my mind, because it helps me remember certain growth periods or reaching tangible points of development. So thanks for suggesting this. It was a worthwhile exercise thinking about what books influenced my life so far. So I took it from when I was very young to present day. So I'm afraid you're not going to be intellectually stimulated with my first choice, but this is where I started. So the first book I thought about was J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion. My great aunt, when I was a kid, used to give me books, really interesting books. So she gave me this big binder of the Chronicles of Narnia, and then she gave me The Hobbit, and followed by the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So after I read the trilogy, I was about maybe 11 or 12, and I heard about the Silmarillion. So I asked my parents to get it, and for those who aren't familiar with this book, it's the prequel to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So it talks about the history or genesis of the Middle Earth, and it's broken up into 5 parts. I won't get into each of the 5 parts, but just as a thumbnail sketch, it's a book that reads a lot. It reads like a mix of Norse mythology, Greek mythology, maybe throw the Old Testament in there. So it's complete with a creation story, genealogy, epic stories of migration and tribe formation, battles and relationships, and just a lot of heroism at the Greek god level. And it even had a huge fold-out map at the back of the hardcover book that I keep flipping back to and understand like where I was in the story. So
nice.
It was
that's Mad Magazine style.
It was just
total
immersive type of experience, and I think it was, really relevant to forming my imagination at a young age. I'd say, all of C.S. Lewis' books and Tolkien's book helped form that active imagination. But, you know, um, there's certain themes that were running through these mytho books, that, especially one that we had a superior forces in this world that have our best interests in mind, and they're guiding the trajectory of humanity. And the divine free will is kind of a theme that's woven through these books. So I think, generally speaking, these themes just instilled a real positive sense or positivity about being alive at a very young age. And I think it's, a good idea for parents to think about, encouraging their kids to read these books at, their impressionable period, like ages 7 to 14.
That's cool, dude. And prose on the page is really great when it gets you early in those fairy tales and fiction that suck you into larger ideas and larger ways of looking at things. Because if you read the Silmarillion when you were that young, it made you realize that books can be even as excellent as cinema, if not more deep and empowering. So it's cool when a book that early gets you so stoked on story and character.
Yeah. I mean, if you're just brought up on Judy Blume novels as a kid, you're not going to want to read a lot of books after that, right?
Well, she's not. She's funny, at least. But I relate to no, but I mean, I read The Hobbit when I was a little kid, and that also brought a lot of wisdom, and you capture the imagination. And it's on my to-do list to read all those books again, because I know they're filled with spiritual wisdom, and also very entertaining, and probably much easier to read than some of the other spiritual books I've definitely dove into.
And is the Silmarillion the one that he wrote, his son finished him after he died? Is that the Tolkien book that was that case?
His son published it after he died.
Okay. But, I thought there were a few chapters.
He actually wrote it.
I know that he wrote it, but I thought there's one of his books. I thought that there were like two chapters missing, and his son finished them. So
maybe. Yeah, his son, Christopher Tolkien. He may have edited it or added something, but it was mostly the father.
And of course, with each book, we don't need to get into the nitty gritty of each book, because anybody listening can obviously, if they haven't read any specific book we're talking about this evening, they can extract it in their own time and find out more about it. It's cool that fiction got you interested in larger themes that maybe you weren't understanding what those larger themes were at the time, but it just allowed you to have kind of a broader vision on something, especially through such a deep text that has so many layers to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, would you want to segue to one, Jonathan? If anything's like, I don't know if you have anything fiction, or is it all nonfiction on your list, buddy?
It's all nonfiction. Yeah. So I took a different approach than Mike, which is good. It's good to have diversity of perspectives. So my approach, I've picked 3 books, and they are all focused on personal transformation and a little bit of metaphysics. And I wanted to talk about the books, and also like how I use them for my own transformation. So a little bit of leaping off the pages into, experience.
Yeah.
So the first book is actually the book I'm reading right now. So I'm enthusiastic. It's a book by an author that is highly influenced, and I know Mike has read this author, but it's called A Religion of Tomorrow, A Vision for the Future of the Great Traditions, More Inclusive, More Comprehensive, More Complete, by Ken Wilber. Are you familiar with him, Niles?
I know who Ken Wilber is because a previous guest on this podcast is a big Ken Wilber fan. Yeah, why don't you give it kind of the initial rundown on what's in it, and what's kind of Wilber-esque material really kind of resonated with you?
Yeah, so I mean, I've read a lot of Ken, and he. So first, just for people, I'm going to speak to as if people don't know. For that part of the audience, he's a meta theorist, and he basically, what he does is he's looked at kind of everything about human development, east, west, or even looking stuff that's like how systems affect us, and biology and culture, and he's looked at kind of everything. He came up with like kind of like a theory of everything by kind of going above. He took this tremendous complexity, and he found all these patterns to make things a lot simpler. but it's really focused on development. So this book is basically about taking his model and how do you apply it to religion, and how do you make religion more modern. So, but this book's really a development book. I mean, it's really, it covers his material can be dense, but but he repeats things a lot, so that it helps it sink it in. And he also went a little bit deeper into some areas that he hasn't gone before. So what he does is he really breaks the book into three different kind of main kinds of developments, and he kind of says that religion really only focuses on one, and it really, if it's going to be modern, it's going to have to add the other two. So basically, I'm going to structure this kind of what I'm talking about is around these three different types, and he calls them growing up, waking up, and cleaning up. And he's got a real gift of language and making things kind of complexity simple. So what he talks about the current religions, what the one that at least particularly Eastern religions are particularly good at is the waking up, which has to do with like meditation, and a lot of people just associate development with this meditative path. But he's saying that if you don't do these three paths, that you're not really gonna self-actualize or get to the highest optimal state that humans can get to during whatever that is for these times. So the first one is called like growing up, and growing up kind of suggests that there's like it's kind of to do with our worldview, and what there's these pattern that's been studies have shown that people go through this similar pattern individually and collectively, and what happens is you kind of like you get to one level of development, and you kind of like start to notice that it doesn't really work, and then you find something like higher, and you have to kind of integrate what you saw below and come up to like a new understanding, and then you stay there for a while, and then you come up to like another kind of understanding. But these shifts, they're not fast. They take a really long time. And the ones that are really common right now, kind of in our, everyone could see in our world, is like there's like a kind of like a super religious dogmatic. And what happens is at each of these, what he calls them structures, it solves a problem from the previous structure, but then creates a new problem. So this new structure, basically, this religion one, basically the previous stage had to do with people kind of like being at each other's throats and very selfish, and then not a lot of rules. And so this one has more of like a rules focused, and they tend to swing from very individualistic to group oriented. So then the next one is like a capitalist structure, a rational structure, which basically kind of goes past the dogma of religion, and then so we can see that kind of like into like modern capitalism, science comes out of it, and then the next one after that has to do with like more of like a hardcore, what we call like the modern liberal, where he kind of says, well, capitalism's too individualistic, it's not enough group, it's not compassionate enough. And each of those perspectives tends to think that they're right and everyone else is wrong. And then comes this new stage, which is called integral. And this is kind of where Ken's kind of like pushing into this new territory. And the integral perspective sees like all the different perspectives below it. And it basically says that they're all kind of right but partial, and they all kind of serve a huge purpose, and it also helps like people get like empathy, because it's like you can start to understand different perspectives, and you don't have to you can understand where they're coming from, and it's just saying that everyone's perspective is kind of based on their worldview and their experience, and it's kind of like a way of looking at the world. It synthesizes and integrates things, and starts intellectually, but then it's also about like embodying it and how you can interact with different people and kind of be successful. And so he kind of talks about how you do this thing called transcend and include, which means that like at each level you kind of take parts of the previous level that are healthy. If you're making the transition healthy, then you basically it'll be clean. But sometimes you basically take the good parts, but then you'll leave it in a healthy spot. You'll recognize that structure is healthy. And then what happens is if you don't do that well, you get what he calls like shadow material, and it causes like a lot of problems like later in life, which gets into like his cleaning up area. So he's just kind of saying there's like all these problems where people didn't integrate something from their past well, and it just kind of gets down into their conscious, subconscious, and it kind of really causes a lot of problems. So
It sounds like he's done a really good job of kind of summarizing the process of your life, dude, and like the steps that you can look back on and say like, hey, this is stuff that I've experienced, and he's doing a really good way of putting it into simplified language and structuring it better. And it's especially interesting to hear your integral element, because I know that you guys are in a group that has integral in the name. So that's a key word that I should use more in vocabulary, isn't it? Like to look at past things that are various ways people look at things and see the benefits of each one and use them all as a kit of parts and take the best pieces from each of them without fully just committing to a specific thing or a specific way of looking at the world, but to kind of keep yourself more in balance and less polarized, and just kind of use the best part of each.
yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, everything in life has a positive and negative aspect to it, and if you're going to stay in balance and equanimity, you're going to want to be able to take multiple perspectives and appreciate them all. And he like really, there's some really clever words he has that, like, for people who tend to get stuck, which I really found useful. Like, one is like, he notices people get very, what he calls reductive, where people just take something really complicated and goes, no, it's this, and then they get really attached to it and they don't want to explore it. It's kind of like looking at like thinking like environmental problems is just about climate change and not willing to like unpack all the complexity and nuance that goes into that. Or he also talks about absolutizing things, where you're only able to look at things from like one vantage point. So he kind of says there are like 4 kind of really important vantage points, which is like the vantage point from like behavior and like our body, or a systems vantage point, or a cultural vantage point, or like a spiritual, psychological vantage point, which he calls the quadrants. And he says a lot of schools of thought will just focus on one of those areas. He calls it like absolutizing, and you'll see that a lot. And a lot of people get really stuck because they won't take in these other perspectives. So it's the whole thing's like, why also I started with him is because that's kind of like that's how his main strength is giving you this meta framework to operate within. Yeah, that's like his real value add. It's really, really useful. So let me talk a little bit more about like waking up. And also talk about, because this is really, it has to do with meditation. And I knew nothing about meditation before I read Ken Wilber. Like, maybe I'd heard of it, but I didn't know anyone who meditated. I didn't know the benefits. And so it kind of like, also like when I read, before I read Ken Wilber, I was agnostic. I was strongly agnostic. I had my only ideas of spirituality were religion, which I found dogmatic, and it just didn't work for me. So he totally woke me up into the spiritual could be something different and something actually rational. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I also helped me get into meditation. I got into it mostly because I was kind of ADD, but it literally changed the whole way I view the world. Like it affected me on like a metaphysical level. I'm in this like meditation program where it's like a Tibetan Buddhist one, and I just like fell into it. I got lucky because I feel like it's really good. And it studies like Ma Mudra and Dzogchen. This guy Dan Brown, who's in Boston, but he's worldwide renowned.
Yeah.
But he kind of has just to go real quickly like through this, he breaks down the stages of waking up, of meditative, is like this gross state where everything is kind of fused together. It's more like the physical reality, and then you start to differentiate. He talks about this whole thing of this process of learning that we all go through, which is everything starts together, totally fused together. And then we start to use our discernment to notice things that are differences, and we make new distinctions about those things. And then we have to use our discernment again to integrate it more and more optimally in our life. Like, how do we actually use this new distinction to fit? So I found that kind of process is universally true for any kind of learning. And so I found that really useful. Then after that comes this subtle stage where you kind of where you can see like more like subtle energies. You can, instead of everything being fused together, you can differentiate between like thoughts and feelings, and you can say, is this feeling coming from my past? Is it something in my context? Is it something like is it a resonance, soul resonance thing? And you start to like, just by, starting to concentrate, you get a little gap between like your thought and your reaction, and it changes everything. So you really move. Like literally, this is a move that I've totally experienced, and then you live at like a different level, and life's kind of different. One thing that's important about just about a difference between the waking up and growing. So the waking up, you can like have you can peak at any of the levels, and I'll go through the 5 levels are gross, subtle, causal, witness, and non-dual. So you can actually have a peak experience at any of these, whereas in the structure level, you can't. You can only peak like one or maybe 2 levels ahead and get a brief taste of it. But with the other one, you can kind of get there's a difference. There's a peak experience where you kind of like, maybe you're in a retreat and you get a real high experience, a taste of a new state. But then there's called stabilization, where you're actually, you just through meditating over and over again, you actually stabilize these different states. So like one of the things I just want to point out how it actually like changed my view of reality, because the meditation practice, there's like a concentration. You get like this kind of like basic like foundation, a structure of stability, and then you kind of like ask all these questions about the nature of consciousness or mind, because really we experience everything in our consciousness, and it kind of changes your whole understanding of like who you are. And it's really useful to get past like traps of the mind. So I'll just go, like I had a peak experience at this thing called like non-dual, and basically like non-dual is just saying like not two, but what it's kind of pointing to is that, we've heard about this kind of oneness of everything, but like a non-dual state is like you actually realize that, you're just your experience. You're just your experiences is like there's like no you. It's like literally like your vision changes and like you don't see yourself anymore. Like
Yeah,
it's
and
kind of a weird place. Anyways, go ahead.
as you go on, I was just going to say I've heard this non-dual term before, and it's an interesting way of looking at the element of like as within, so without, in the sense that everything is a reflection of self as well.
Mm-hmm.
So non-dual has an interesting component where like when you kind of boil it down to that simplicity, you can see things from a perspective of everything is also, there's no separation in anything. So that's a whole side conversation for sure. But you read a book. Here's an example of you reading a book that then leads you to a practice and opens you in so many ways in terms of mind, and then opens your heart through your actual practice as well. So that's great. And you can see the influence. Think of how your life has changed through the works of Ken Wilber, maybe heightened by this specific book.
Yeah, man. It's yes, exactly. Just this author, exactly. It's just a roadmap. Like I talked like before, like everything was fused together. I didn't see meditation. I didn't see spirituality. I read this book. It points out a new path I knew nothing about. And then I actually experiment with it. And that it's only when you actually experiment with it that you actually have like the deep, profound, like spiritual learning. But books are so useful in pointing out new ways, new perspectives of things that wouldn't occur to you. And then I feel like, as you're kind of saying, they actually lead to actual behavior change, and that's where like you move from like an intellectual spirituality to more of like a behavior one.
Readers are leaders. And do you have anything, Mike, that you want to kind of key on from what Jonathan mentioned before I move on to a couple others?
No, actually, I haven't read this book. I've read, some of Wilbur's books, but I haven't read this. There's Jonathan and a few other friends who are really interested in this, and
Yeah, and I haven't read Wilbur's
me.
stuff either, and I should add that to the reading list. And I don't mean necessarily stuff from that specific book, but just some of those concepts that Jonathan unpacked a bit. Like if there's anything you want to add to. One thing that I can add to is in terms of framework, like you said, Jonathan, is how beautiful it is when an author or somebody that maybe has a little bit better development than you do puts things in a really beautiful framework to help you kind of have a structured level to understand things better. It's almost like they create the shelves for you to then put the items on to then organize your thoughts or your way of looking at things better. So people that put things into a nice framework really well and then say things the way that you have been feeling, but they articulate them really well is a beautiful thing. So that's something that I find.
Yeah, I agree. I just to close on the book, I'll just say that the one area he goes a lot more in depth in that he doesn't in other books for people who have read a lot of Wilbur is this whole area I didn't go in ton of depth is, but this whole idea of cleaning up shadow, and he really gets in detail about for each of those kinds of stages I was talking about and the growing up and waking up about what the different dysfunctions are and how you got some ways to get rid of them. And I found that those things really screw up your growth. They make it a lot harder, and they're really important. And that's where I think like some of the entheogens can really help in that, particularly in that domain of really helping you. They've helped me a lot in giving me guidance on what are the next steps to remove that in ways that other modes haven't. Is a lot faster. Anyways, I'll conclude with that and let you go on, Nas.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is like the whole thing about reading is so crucial. And so many people only are, reading academically and then stop reading later on in life, right? So as three of us that find ourselves to care about reading things and obviously know that it's a key part of our development. It's obviously an early part of a process that should always be like an infinite path of autodidactness, right? So reading is key. And it's beautiful when you can look back at certain touchstones of prose that were really influential on you. And it's amazing too how few people read anything after they leave their schooling system. I almost said education, but I mean schooling, of course. So I'll move on here. I mean, I'll give one little book, and that was a children's book. And obviously, as Mike mentioned, something that he read when he was young that influenced him. A children's book that really influenced me was Where the Wild Things Are, which was because it was such a beautiful visual book that it really got me inspired in seeing things from such a visual way, especially in kind of a much like the Silmarillion, seeing things visually, creatively outside of what you normally would see, right? So the Where the Wild Things Are had these amazing characters in it that just expanded the mind as a little person to say like, whoa, those are cool creatures. What are those? I want to draw my own creatures. It was the first like experience where I consumed something that was yummy, and it made me want to create things that were yummy. In terms of leading into how I probably met you guys was I had many years ago, I can't remember how long ago it was probably at the time we're doing this podcast, 8 or 10 years ago, I had read a book, always being somebody that was interested in philosophy, but only having experience with just kind of the Stoic German philosophers like Nietzsche and Heidegger, the kind of more academic, stuffy philosophers. I'd always been interested in philosophy and interested in science fiction. So at some point later on as a teenager or as a young lad, I think I read it in college, was Philip K. Dick's Valis. And Valis and Philip K. Dick in general are two. Dick is an interesting guy, and especially from his kind of Gnostic perspectives on things. And to talk just about Philip K. Dick could be a whole nother conversation. But for those that haven't read Valis or aren't familiar with Valis, it's just kind of this weird schizophrenic mind dump on the page. And there's a whole kind of story behind how it came about. Same with some of Dick's other books, such as like his exegesis and, some of his other works. But without getting into the nitty gritty of Valis, I highly recommend everybody read it, even though it's a very weird book. The reason I'm mentioning it and the reason it was so influential on me numerous years ago is because in that book, repeatedly, Dick had used this sentence that I think he says at least 3 times in the book, which is that the empire never ended, right? And so when I first read that in Valis, it got me thinking about that concept of like the empire never ended. And this is obviously a term that is very much something that has been a concept that just led me realize like my entry into a lot of things spiritual or into like, spiritual philosophy was, why aren't people saying the things or talking about the things that I'm interested in? And, this is before I knew much about them. And this concept, reading this concept in Valis, the empire never ended, kind of put a framework on something where it's like, well, that's an interesting concept. If we used to think that empires were just these things where countries were taken over from armies in the past, we don't have a modern day perspective on what empire really is and what it does to people. So this term of empire inevitably led me into looking at areas of kind of conspiratorial areas. And that inevitably leads us to somebody that we've all interacted with on somewhat of a professional level and a social level, which is Neil Kramer, because Neil is such a world expert on speaking about empire from more of an esoteric and occult perspective. So this book is actually kind of what I think essentially led me to Neil's material. And that concept is something that I think Neil is such a world expert at talking about, and is something that as I've kind of continued in my journey to kind of talk about the negative aspects of things that lead us towards growth processes, you have to talk about something in the perspective of using the language of this term empire. So that was a huge way. And that's, of course, how I know you guys is because of our familiarity with Neil. So that was a huge, just a book that has a reoccurring theme or just one thing. Even if you read a book and it's rubbish, but you extract one thing out of it that's totally life-changing, that's amazing. And that's
Yeah,
huge. And
exactly.
Yes.
yeah, and the Book of the Law was another one, the Crowley book, which is a weird book, but there's like there's like one section in the Book of the Law where he like totally deconstructs and just dismantles all things sports. And for me, it was like, just for those 2 pages of the book, it's like, oh, dude, he totally like, it's like call the Postal Service because he just delivered on that so well. So, even if there's a book that you don't get 95% out of it, but there's like one section that's just like, yes, light bulb, fireworks, boom.
Yep. It's
That's
well
the
worth
thing.
it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
well worth it. So,
I mean, I've heard so many people talk about Philip Dick lately that, and I'll admit I haven't read anything by him, but he's really the next author who's in my crosshairs, because I do want to read about, where he lands on, Gnosticism and topics like that. It sounds like his novels are just rich with Gnostic themes.
very much so. And there's a gentleman, if you guys aren't familiar, named Anthony Peake, who's a writer who is he's done extensive study of Philip K. Dick's life himself, and actually wrote a biography on Philip K. Dick, which I believe, off the top of my head, is called The Man Who Remembered the Future. And looking into, Anthony Peake has done some, if you just Google Anthony Peake, maybe I'll put these in the show notes. He's done some beautiful interviews on alternate media where he's just talked about Philip K. Dick. So maybe, Mike, as you kind of, before you even dive into some of Dick's book, listen to Anthony Peake, some of his interviews talking about Dick and specifically his life in general, because there's really interesting things there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Would you want to dive into another one, Mike?
Okay, just make a quick comment.
yeah, go ahead, John.
I haven't read that. I've heard great things about that author, but I just want to, just a quick comment about Neil Kramer. I just he, for me, speaking of integrative, he was the first person that tied my deep interest into spirituality and development with the whole dark unveilings, conspiracies, and like I didn't know anyone else was doing to that one. So when I stumbled on his work, I was like, huge light bulbs off. So I just feel like he's doing such omens work that he's filling that space, and I hope more and more people kind of bring that kind of integration together, because I think it's so super important.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and to talk about us reading things and then doing life experiences and then having XYZ happen after you catalyzed by something that you read, let alone getting to know people based upon somebody's material that you stumbled across. It's like much credit to Neil, who I'm very honored to call a colleague as well. It's like, obviously working on a project with him, it's like, it's great that we're an example of people that continuously have yummy mind fuel conversations because, led to primarily because of Neil. So we give him, much love and credit for those kind of unions. And I agree that I think when you stumble across one person's information that leads you to another person's information, but then later on you kind of look back at people who are like, oh, that person's information doesn't really resonate with me that much anymore. Neil is the opposite of that, where anytime I go back and look at Neil's information, it's still, very strong, and it's a testament to the quality level of his material.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing, just quick, piggyback on that, and yes, the two of my biggest areas of fellowship right now are because of Neil Kramer and Ken Wilber, and the people who are into both those bodies of work have been like some of the most amazing people I've met, and I've got so many deep, interesting friendships, both in person and online, with people who are into both those disciplines. So, my hat's off, deep bow to both of them for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to pick up another one, Mike?
Sure. So I'm going to continue on my chronological journey here. Now I'm 17 years old. So I got a hold of this book from my older brother. He was home from, summer break from the university, and he was taking a course where this was required reading, and he kind of tossed it to me and said, read this, you moron. Maybe you'll get smarter. So it's called Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche. Yeah. So reading through this, and eventually I picked it up and started reading it, and I'll admit that I didn't fully grasp the concepts at age 17, but in retrospect, I think it had a profound effect on me. It started to crumble my view of the way the world was constructed, especially as it related to religion. I mean, I was brought up in a Roman Catholic family. And so over the years, I've gone back to this book and had more realizations of what Nietzsche was actually talking about. I'm not sure if this book was the genesis of a let's call it rebellious attitude I have with the mainstream and social conditioning, but it's more probable than not. So just a synopsis on the book. So Zarathustra was the main character, and he's loosely associated with a descended master of Zoroastrianism, one of these ancient religions. So he's presented as kind of a prophet wandering through the world, almost like a parody of Jesus in the New Testament. And he brought three interesting thoughts into the mainstream. So one was Nietzsche pronounced through this Zarathustra guy that God is dead. And this quote hit the mainstream. It was actually on the cover of Time magazine in 1966, where Time asked, they asked the question as it related to declining interest in religion in general. But it was really Nietzsche's way of saying this is what Christianity has done. The Christian God died at the hands of Christian morality. And so Nietzsche's work kind of expressed the fear that the decline of religion, rise of atheism, and would plunge the world into chaos. And society would move into an age of nihilism. And it's weird because Nietzsche is often associated as a nihilist, but he's actually the opposite of it, a nihilist. So the second theme was the supreme will to power. It's a phrase that's often associated with Nietzsche. And what he meant by that was, although the will to power, the human's will to power can manifest through violence and physical dominance, he was more interested in the sublimated will to power, where people can turn their will to power inward and pursue self-mastery rather than mastery over others.
Right.
So that was his twist on that word. And then the third thing that the theme was humanity is in this transition from apes to Superman. He calls it Übermensch. And this is helped along by recognizing our capacity for self-mastery. But he was contending that humanity is in a transition phase, and we stopped being animals when we taught ourselves to control our instincts, and rather than directing our will power outward to dominate others, we direct it inward and gain self-mastery. So, those were the main themes of this. But again, I found this, it's kind of one of the top philosophical treatises if you're in a philosophy course in college. But this did have a fairly profound effect on me at 17, because I started to look at the world much differently, and kind of the social conditioning, the religious conditioning that was kind of making up, a big part of my life.
Do you credit that book to kind of helping you realize that there's kind of more of an inward path to things as well?
Yeah, I mean, one theme I noticed in the books that I chose was each one more or less helped pull me out of like a deeply conditioned way of thinking, and in a sense decommission certain views that I had which were mainstream.
Yes, right. And I think that's the testament to kind of the mind opening that books can have for you. Especially when you're just kind of an avid reader and you're really willing to soak up information and always kind of have broader horizons on things, especially the stuff that you pick off the page, because a text can have so much more dense information than almost any other medium. So that's beautiful to hear that's kind of, it's beautiful to see these kind of little examples that hit upon that really are life-changing at any stage.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting he chose the word like Superman, but in Ken Wilber's thing as you get up to the really highest states. I think he calls it like supermind or something like that, or
Oh, yeah.
overmind. And so there's like
Ah.
start to see the overlap between these different things.
Yeah. No, I mean, Wilbur,
super
you
mixed
know,
mind.
yeah. I mean, Wilbur, you know, he was he brought together all these meta narratives and did just an excellent job in bringing things together into a coherent, you know, meta philosophy.
Does Wilbur still influence you a lot, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I'll read him once in a while, but you know, I, in a sense, I like to go beyond the maps that Wilbur's laid out, and I've gravitated more to experience rather than just looking at maps, and I think that's where Wilbur helps, is mapping out the interior world.
Yeah, he's very good at that. I agree with that. It's all about the experience, but I think where he can help you contextualize where your experience is. I feel like that's where he's kind of useful. But as he will tell you, the map is not the territory, so don't get them confused. So his maps are a representation of reality, but not reality itself. So they're definitely not all inclusive, and he would be the first one to tell you that.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, do you want to give your next one, Jonathan?
Sure. So this next book is something I kind of feel like is missing from the Ken Wilber book, which is he doesn't really talk about the body that much, but how do we develop our body? And this book is an introduction. It's a cornerstone book, and I'm really into like alternative health. I kind of geek out on that, both doing and reading. And so this book I know is considered one of the cornerstones of like alternative health, and it's called The Body Electric, Electromagnetism and the Foundations of Life by Robert Becker and Gary Selden. Is that a book you guys heard of?
No.
Conceptually,
tell us more.
Yeah, conceptually familiar with, of course, like electric universe and how the body is so electric and, you know, earthing and grounding, but haven't read that specific one. So do tell, my good man.
Yes. So I'm going to tell a little bit about the book, and then I'm going to jump into how it's like how electricity keeps getting into my life in different ways. And so the book is really cool. It's kind of like it's a bit technical, but it's basically this guy. He just kind of gets really into like it's a scientist, and he gets into all these different like experiments about electricity, and there's a lot of like experiments about like like regeneration and how the nervous system is used to regenerate things, and he's noticing like it totally contradicts like all of the Western, because the nervous system really isn't that so electricity runs through the nervous system, so there's a big connection between electricity and the nervous system, and he's just like noticing how fundamental it is. So it's a whole book that's very about like scientific experiments. And the other reason this book is really cool is because it exposes the mainstream narrative about health, and also just shows how all the people are so like have gotten so absolutized or reductive about they're so like stuck in their current thing, that even though he's got real science that proves that a lot of the current thinking is wrong or incomplete, and they just reject it because the people are so closed. And plus, obviously, if you look into I don't want to get all into that angle, but obviously there's also forces where monetary forces that kind of influence why this technique, this regeneration technique, and this electricity is healing is also like kind of put off to the side and considered alternative. It's not that mainstream, at least even today. I think it's still kind of emerging.
Can't be patented by the pharmaceutical industry.
Exactly. It's all about natural healing, man. It's all about exposing electricity heals. So I want to talk about a couple like this 3 ways now in my life electricity has like come into my life in a very important way. So one way is I stumbled on this healing system called Chi Energy Heals, and it's basically like a very esoteric Qigong or Tai Chi. So it's kind of like that family, but it's not directly that. It's a little bit different, and it really gets into like it teaches you these techniques. These flow patterns where you actually amp up the energy in your nervous system, and you get like a lot more energy. And they say that you can amp up your electrical energy way more than you can do your muscular energy and your hormones, that those kind of have limits, but the electrical system almost like has no limits. But they tell you that like it's kind of dangerous. If you don't do it right, you could hurt yourself and you could hurt others. So they are super geeked out about you have to do it in this very specific way or it's not going to work, and they constantly emphasize it. So it's like because the way you generate this energy, that it sticks. So I'll just get into how you like make it good. So you have to be like cool temperature. Like we actually like I'll put ice on me while I'm doing it, because if you get like hot in your energy, then you're like angry and you're out of control. So the coolness kind of gives you like a stability and an energy. So you're getting this powerful energy, but you're staying really cool. And then another part is like intensity. It's about keeping like a low intensity, just like relaxed and just staying. And it's also about being in a good mood, because if you're putting like bad mood energy into you, then you're going to be in a bad mood. So like whatever, when you're doing the exercise, if you're not cool, if you're not doing a low temperature, you're not in a good mood, and you have those opposite traits, you're going to be putting those negative characteristics. And they're like, if you're not like in that frame of mind, they're like, don't do it. You're just going to screw yourself up. So it really kind of helps you do that. And they put a heavy emphasis on like relaxation. I feel like relaxation is like a really important about being optimizing, including they have lots of like lying down meditations where you just focus on getting more and more and more relaxed. That's a theme that keeps coming up for me every time I've done like entheogens, like an ayahuasca. The first thing the medicines always does is like chill me out so I can like take in the learnings, kind of getting calm. And it really has taught me this idea of amplitude. Like I always associated like amplitude with like music, right? So you're turning up the volume. But what this has kind of taught me is that amplitude's like actually like a core spiritual teaching. And it's really what it's telling you is that you can turn up the motherfucking amplitude, but also do it in a way that's kind of like calm and in control. And like there's a lot of power in this electricity. And so I've been doing this program for about a year and a half, and it's been really influential on me, and it's been really, really important. And then one other way I'll just talk about that electricity's really influenced my life is through, it turns out that like emotions are energy, and it turns out that we hold emotions in our nervous system. And I didn't know that. So I've been doing all this cleaning up work, this kind of like shadow work that I talked about with the Ken Wilber stuff. And I've been doing it all from like a mental angle. And then the universe is like, no, Jonathan, like giving me this, like, if you don't, it's the trauma is not only in your mind, but it's in your body. And if you don't do somatic practices, you cannot, you're not going to totally get rid of your trauma. So I've been doing this thing called spinal network analysis. And it's like this long-term thing where they work on your spine with like these light touches, and you have to do it a lot or it doesn't really work. Because the first stages, they're just kind of getting tension out, and then they have to do like the real deep work. But it turns out like we have all these like emotional blockages that actually form in our physical body. So there's this huge literal mind-body connection that we hold it. And a lot of people think that, your psychological blockages often manifest into your physical wounds. I mean, a lot of people like just also say this like with the chakra system as well. And so they just do these like light touches. It's real easy. It's done by chiropractor, but they don't crack your bones. But yeah, it takes a while. But yeah, it also, what they're doing is they're removing blockages so that, this electricity can flow even more. And it also, it works on the spine is really significant. So like there's a central nervous system actually runs up the spinal system, and that's kind of where they operate. So you think about like, there's a metaphor for like, because like if you have emotional stability, then you have stability, but it's also like, it also gives you physical stability, like, because it's in your spine. And so actually they literally, when they take this trauma out of your spine actually goes in the right direction. Like it changes, it physically changes over time. Like I'm getting measured like every 12 weeks, and literally like I used to have like a curved fear-based spine, and now it's getting more erect. And I'll tell you what, when you're more erect, you feel a lot more confident, a lot more powerful. It's been extremely helpful.
Yeah, just posture in general. And I know that there's
Posture.
something too with the spine in terms of your C7 vertebrae. There's like some way that your skull sits on your vertebrae where there's a process where they can essentially crack your neck, and it has, I can't remember the actual name of the procedure, but they do a thing where they like essentially lift your skull up off your vertebrae. They do a stretch of your neck that's supposed to like have some huge holistic benefit, or like gives you, more mental clarity. It sounds like a lot of this is kind of in the area of kind of Reiki or Qigong, as you talk about the spine as well, and the tapping and various energetic properties of moving energies around, especially as they're something that maybe has come up from mental baggage that's then manifested in physical parts of your body.
Yes, I think yeah, it's definitely a subtle energy, just like Reiki, which I'm going to do for the first time next week. But yeah. But yeah, it's the exact same thing. It's all about dealing with moving blockages, moving subtle energy out, and so yeah, that's spot on. And I think I have also, the last thing I'll just say about this is that like I've also run across special massage people and special acupuncturists that only work on removing physical blockages between your nervous system and your organs, because they say if they have blockages in those, it'll cause problems in your organs. So anyways, electricity to me, just over the last few years, something completely off my radar, helped by both books and personal experiences, has really, opened my eyes to a lot of has really helped my personal transformation.
Nice.
And Elfrida Pretorius, who's been on this podcast and is a friend, had an ailment, had a physical ailment. She had something on her back that she very much credits towards a lot of mental stuff that was going on in her life at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if she claims if that's the only cause or what, but she definitely credits at least a partial cause to her having various things going on in her life that were mentally stressing her out. And we all know the ties to like stress and, knots in your back and bad posture and, all these things that the mind-body connection with cleaning house on both fronts can have mutual benefits to one another, for sure.
Exactly. I think the mind bias is enormous. I think that's like this, as we're entering this integrative age, I think that's going to become more and more of a theme. It'll become more mainstream, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, do you have anything else you want to add to any of those concepts, Mike, before we move on?
I would say that I rely on Jonathan to hear about the next wave of healing, because he does a lot of experimentation, and
True.
It's great because there's some really interesting stuff out there.
Just before we even do move on, there are certain books that do a really good job on the health front to just really give perspective and insight as to like how you can better yourself in terms of what's really going on with our food system and alternate ways of looking at things. I think of certain books as well that have been very like nutrition based that I've read that have been very influenced. Like one that just kind of springs to mind from me is Diet for a New America, which talks about, that just when that came out and just tells people about the horrors and the awfulness of factory farming, or how much resources are wasted by floating, you can float a destroyer and the amount of water it takes to, raise factory farm beef and this type of stuff, where there's books can have a huge perspective on allowing you to see health from a different way, especially also like various forms of prose, blog posts, like health blogs that are really good about opening you up to other things. Some very, very much in a similar way that like a documentary film can. But
Right.
yeah, beautiful. Well, whose turn is it? Is it my turn to do another one?
It's you,
It's
Niles.
me. Okay, yeah.
But
Go ahead.
Can we
go
just
ahead,
take a
Jonathan.
30-second break? I just got to pee and my alarm's like going off.
Pee.
I'll be right back.
Pee well, my friend. In fact, maybe I'll
All right.
pee I'll pee real quick as well. So we'll reconvene in 45 seconds.
Okay, sounds good. I'm back.
Okay.
I think we're still waiting for Mike.
Maybe Mike went as well. It's like who can pee
Yeah.
the fastest? Which of the three guys can pee the fastest?
I got back first. I got the prize.
Yeah, I peed before the podcast too. Sometimes
Me
I
too.
guess as you get older, dude, your men's bladders don't hold as long. So my
Yeah.
70
I'm back.
my 72, we were just saying, Mike, that as you get older, your bladder doesn't hold as long. So I don't know if you
Yeah.
noticed this, dude.
Yeah.
Like my dad is 72 and he has to wake up every night at least once to pee.
Oh,
So,
really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty common.
Yeah. And it's like if guys live to be 110, you'd just be pissing like, half a dozen times in the middle of the night.
We'll have like a bag in the front of our pants or something.
Yeah, you don't care. You just piss where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. For a man, fuck that.
That's funny. All right. Well, picking up where we left off. So As the next thing that I pulled, I have this concept with all the books that I kind of pulled this evening, where it's not so much the book overarching, but more like just something that I extracted out of the book. So the next book for me was The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly Palmer Hall, which is of course a crazy deep, wild book, much like his, Secret Destiny of America book, or like these books that are very deep, and especially The Secret Teachings of All Ages, which is kind of considered Manly P. Hall's like magnum opus. But the one thing that's strange about it is that he wrote it so bizarrely young that there's big questions about how it was written. Some say it was a channeled book. Some people question that maybe he was given this material by somebody else, because I think he literally wrote this incredible book in his like late 20s. But out of all the things that I pulled out of the book, which is basically kind of like an esoteric history of the world, kind of summarized, but literally I think it's the very last paragraph of the book. Manly P. Hall has a separation between essentially religion, which like you had mentioned, Mike, in the book that had been influential on you. He separates essentially religion and science from philosophy, and he kind of gives it in this like, religion being the right side and science being the left side, and then philosophy being kind of the middle center. So he did a really good job of kind of separating, I guess, what you would call like pious dogmatism from deist spiritualism, in the sense of like separating spirituality from religion, and then also separating science is, of course, just measurement. So I wouldn't just say, I would credit more like Victorian era materialism to just say like material point of view. I wouldn't just say that science is materialistic, because there's various forms of science that are all forms of measurement. We can have science in more kind of like spiritual and metaphysical areas as well. And I think that much of metaphysics is just kind of science that hasn't yet been discovered. But the point of the last chapter in The Secret Teachings of All Ages is that he basically separates, the claim is that philosophy is kind of the depolarizing paths, and especially spiritual philosophy, to kind of realize, to ascend to higher places, right? And then religion has its place and science has its place, but philosophy is, he would kind of put as this capstone to the pyramid. So for me, was very influential in sending me on more of a kind of path of being somebody that's a student of spiritual philosophy and is interested in things of ancient wisdom and stuff like that. So I distinctly remember the wrap up of that book is just melting my brain and blowing my mind.
That's I read that book. That's a really good book, actually. It opens you up to like all different. I remember reading like about like Pythagoras, and I never knew he was like a mystic. And I remember just thinking about the Pythagorean theorem and like how Hermes supposedly brought all this like science to us. And it's a book that it's like, I found parts of it like really riveting, and other parts I remember finding were a tough slog, because it's not like a 700-page book or something.
It's long for sure.
Yeah. It's long, but it's a worthy read. I'm glad I read it. I got a lot of it. I mean, there are parts of it that were really eye-opening. And it just opens you up to like a whole bunch of different, esoteric stuff that you could then go dig deeper. It's almost like a portal into all these different worlds. I think of like this, there's this expression that I call like portal people, which are people who expose you to other people. And
Nice.
like, that's an awesome book for portal people, and Neil Kramer's another portal person. And there were like even musicians. I know they would do certain musicians they'd always collaborate with all these different people, and everyone they collaborated with, they took me into like a new group. So anyways, portal people are awesome, and he definitely is one of those.
That's a good summary, dude. It's like, black hole of, they wormhole you into somebody else's material or somebody else's kind of cosmology. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, I haven't read his book, but I listened to a patchwork of YouTubes of him speaking.
Yes.
It just covers so much territory. I mean, alchemy and Kabbalah and Pythagorean philosophy. It's crazy how much he talked about.
It is crazy, and he didn't even do it with notes, too. He just he did these things at the Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles, and on a Friday evening, he just, they'd have this open house where people just come in, and like you say, Mike, he just sits down and he's like, tonight's conversation will be a discussion on the alchemical transmutation of the soul through Kabbalistic metaphysical transitional alchemy, and you're like, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he had that great transatlantic accent. Manly P. Hall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's beautiful. So why don't you throw out your next one, dude? Mr.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's see. So I struggled with this one because it's not a very well-known story. And the book itself didn't get very high literary praise. But in the end, I think it's a book that I think made an indelible mark on me when I read it in my early 20s. So yeah, we're up to roughly age 24. And I've thought about it often, and I don't know why. So the book is called A Man, and it's by Oriana Fallaci. She was an Italian journalist, very active in the 1960s and 1970s. And she had some really high profile interviews with, Yasser Arafat and Henry Kissinger and the Ayatollah. And just a little side story, her interview with the Ayatollah Khomeini, she challenged him during the interview why women should wear chadors.
Right.
And he kind of brushed her off and he sarcastically told her that it was the woman's choice. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so she said, okay, well, I'm just going to take off this stupid medieval rag right in the middle of the interview. And can you just imagine, Christiane Amanpour or Rachel Maddow doing that now when they're interviewing some Saudi prince?
Yeah, exactly.
So she was, Fallaci was a rebel. And anyway, I picked up her book called A Man, and it's a biography, but it's written in the form of a novel. And she and a guy named Alexandro Panagoulis, I think is how you say his name, they were lovers. They were in an intense relationship. And this guy was bigger. He was larger than life. He was a poet. He was Greek, poet, a revolutionary, just a guy intensely passionate about life. And at the time, there was a military coup in Greece, and there was a military dictatorship, a junta. And this guy hatched a plan to assassinate the military dictator, George Papadopoulos, and he failed. And he was put in prison for 5 years and brutally tortured. And then he got out, and lo and behold, the military junta is no longer there. He got himself elected to a Senate seat. Then he gets, so he got a hold of some intelligence. And he was going to testify in front of a tribunal about Greek politicians dealing with the Nazis in World War II. And the military junta or ex-military junta got a hold of this, and basically he was killed. This happened only 2 days before the files were to be, made public. So they ran him off the road, and they killed him in an auto accident.
Right.
So the book just hit me in the face with kind of the individual heroism of this guy Alexandro, and his determination, his solitary quest to, rid the country of a dictatorship, his zest for life, his quest for the truth. And what really hit me was his resilience, him being tortured in prison. So it was an impressionable book about everything that happened to this guy, and he never lost his positivity, his zest for life. And I think in a way it kind of prepared me to handle negative stuff in my own life that were, just paled in comparison to what he went through. And for some reason, it's always stayed with me.
And it shows you the brutality of what really goes on behind the scenes too. Somebody's horrible experience dealing with the system, or having their rights stripped away, or being in these hellish, awful situations of a failed state.
Right.
So,
And it's probably happening all around us today in different countries. There's just not, an author to write about it in the way that she did. And, someone who's not, have the inside information that she did.
and heroic stories of people that are in so much strife and struggle, those can be very empowering, especially when you see somebody that has such a great perspective on it and stays so they almost just don't let it get the better of them type of situations, and that very much kind of reminds me of the kind of Spencer Barclay attitude on facing the civil system or the machine of commerce or something, where he calls it, you gotta just be Bob Wiley with it. You gotta be Bill Murray and What About Bob? He uses this
Yeah.
metaphor where it's like you got to just be, you can't even acknowledge or recognize the horribleness of it, but you just got to be proactive and empowering and almost lighthearted towards it. Because if you allow it to co-opt you, you know, you kind of stand under it. So it's like you can't let it negatively affect you or tear you down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man.
It's so,
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
no, I just think your last point is just so important about, yeah, how we hold these, like the fact that there's all these, not getting lost in the negative polarity, about noticing all these dark things that are happening, and it just, you know, like how much can we control of it? And, you know, at another level, I think, you know, it represents kind of like a level of consciousness and where we are. And just, I see too many people get hyper focused on that. And I just feel like there, you can also, like, how, wherever you focus your energy, you know, it'll have major impacts on the rest of your life. So you can also focus on all the good stuff that's going too. And of course you want to do a little bit of both, but of course to get that balance. But anyways, I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah, and another aspect to that is just like not letting it tear you down in terms of, I've had things in past day job land or like the heinous trenches of Hollywood where I've been in just this horrible, you know, hellish schedule experiences, and I'm just like this, I just keep it lighthearted and be like, this is so ridiculous, I just have to laugh at it. And then you see the person next to you who's so morally invested in the situation of the career positioning or the corporate, you know, rule structure or the hierarchy, or like letting it stress them out and get to them. And of course you want to be professional and you want to try and be honorable to getting a project done. But at the same time, if you're in some Iranian prison or in some sort of like Mogadishu refugee camp, and you keep a good attitude about it, you can only speak to the things, the hellish experiences that you've been through. But when somebody has gone through such awful things and keeps a good-hearted experience about it and doesn't let them break them, even if it's like work stress or life awfulness, there's a lot of self-empowerment in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the keys I found that, like, what I found is like holding, if you can hold like your current perspective, like within like a more meta perspective that's like more positive, like, you know, this bad experience is, you know, it's sure it's bad on one hand, but it's also could make me stronger. Or this is like a lot of the meditation state stuff, you're kind of actually like realizing that everything's just energy and everything's here as a teaching experience. So you could, you know, everything, you know, that's happening is good or bad. It's telling you something that you want to repeat doing or something not to do. So there's lots of ways of looking at things that help you create that attitude that you're talking about now. So it's like so super important.
Well, do you want to pick up the torch, my good man, Jonathan?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give this third book. I'll be like Mike. I'll piggyback off him. I'll give you a little context about when I came to it, like age-wise. So I'm currently 46. So this was probably about as I was approaching 40, I was like, I'd kind of gotten to a point where I was like, you know, my life's pretty good, but like, I don't feel like I'm being like my highest best self. I feel like, you know, something's missing. And development had always been like a part of my life, but I decided like literally like I'm going to double down on development. I'm like going to actually go for this higher best self thing. Like I just midlife thing. So I just this is a book that was really influential to me. So I had actually kind of a big music geek, and I listened to a lot of music, and I used to go to like concerts all the time. But one of the things I actually changes I made in my transformation was to slowly drop down some of the concerts and music, and I actually replaced it with books, and particularly audiobooks. So I listen to like audiobooks. I have like a 30-minute commute back and forth. So with that context, the book that I chose here is called A Philosopher's Notes on Optimal Living and Creating an Authentic, Awesome Life and Other Such Goodness by Brian Johnson. And Brian Johnson, what he did was he had this whole series called Philosopher's Notes, where he actually he just read like not every, but tons of different self-help books, philosophy books, self-improvement books, all sorts of books, not a little bit esoteric, but a little bit more, probably more mainstream-ish. And he basically summarized them like in a Cliff Notes. And so I kind of got into that. And then he created this book called Optimal Living, which is like the best of the Cliff Notes. So he like did like, I forgot, like 100, maybe 200 of the notes. And then he did the Optimal Living. And then he made it into a book, and he made it into a class. and I think he's still teaching the class now. I think I just looked it up, and I did the class and I looked at the book. So it's just at a high level. It's just all these super practical tips on how to like be your higher self, and it was probably a good place for me to start when it was this transition, because it got into like a lot of fundamental concepts that really gave me a good stability to grow on. So he really, like, first off, just, you are what you do. So daily habits, basic stuff, but it's so fundamental. It's like what you do every day and how you spend your time. So it's like, you focusing on getting sleep, are you focusing on getting exercise, you're getting the right health. It's basic stuff, but it's core. If you don't do that stuff, you're not going to be optimal. So I really, that influenced me in a big way. I got some of that of my life, like especially food, was way off, and I totally got me thinking about healthy food. And then just this concept of like baby steps. Again, it's simple, in some ways obvious, but just like saying, like, just change is freaking hard. It's super hard. And really big transformation is just a lot of really, really small steps, baby steps. And any kind of transformation, your personal transformation, global transformation, group growth, organization. So it's just always, like, we talked about like contextualizing things just before. I was talking about, I always go back to like, okay, if I get frustrated with things or I want to have a certain result, I just remind myself, okay, I'm just taking baby steps right now. I don't have to get caught up in having that angle right now. It's like, I keep asking myself the question, what is the next baby step towards whatever particular goal I'm working on? So I come back to that like constantly, even as I get into much more esoteric stuff. That one to me is still like super fundamental. You talked about fellowship, about the people you become, like the people you hang around. So you talked about, you're like the average of the 5 people you hang out the most with. I forgot who said that, but he kind of aggregates. But it just reminded me of even when I right around this age, I actually did kind of an assessment of a lot of my friends, and a lot of people I really liked, but also like maybe they weren't growing as much, and I actually gravitated more to like a spiritual and growth oriented group. And this is kind of when actually I met Mike, and the group, we actually have a little fellowship here in Boston, and we met through like this integral theory meetup, and I kind of shifted around that. So that was super powerful for me to have people who spend more time with people in this kind of growth space that I was in. So I mean, it's just like a book of like all of this just super helpful like tips and exercises. Like there's like how to get in touch with like your like where you want to go. Like I talk about just like you write your own eulogy. Like how do you want people to remember you? And then take that as like a future state and compare that where we are now, and that can give you insights on like what you might want to change. Because I know a lot of people struggle with that, and he talks about the importance of prioritizing, what's urgent, what's not urgent, what's important, not important, and try and focus on things that are both important and urgent. And
prioritize.
Prioritizing. Like, again, this is another fundamental tool. Like because especially for me as someone who is like ADD and I have a zillion different interests, I constantly, like every day, I have like a giant list of things to do, and I like literally put it in a word table, and I start writing down the numbers, and I go, all right, this is priority, this is urgent, and like I have to keep doing that, because otherwise I'd be, I wouldn't be moving forward. I'd just be doing a zillion different things without any like growth.
Right.
So
that's what you just said is going to lead into the next book that I talk about. But yeah, it is layers of an onion, isn't it? Where it's like a bunch of small little things that you peel off over time. And the other concept I've heard behind that 5 best friends thing, dude, is another angle on it, where your income in 5 years will be the average of your 5 best friends' income. So then people hear that and they're like, I got to get some new friends. Because all my friends are like, all my friends are struggling. It's like financially. So that's probably a more shallow version of looking at that perspective. But I think it's more like you have a hybrid brain mind meld around your 5 best friends, or the 5 people that you can be your most authentic self around, or something like that. But there is a beautiful simplicity in stuff that's broken down into these kind of bullet points or cliff notes, isn't it? It almost sounds like that book is a series of axioms or maxims to just simplify, instead of having a text that's so deep, like some run-on 1,000-page secret teachings of all ages, or the
Yeah.
secret doctrine type thing, where it's just like, oh God, this is so long. If it's
Yeah.
just simple and basic, that's
Let
beautiful.
me this is actually, I want to leave on a quote that I did not get from this book, but I love it because it so fits in with this conversation, which is the path to salvation is as narrow and as difficult to walk as a razor's edge, by William Somerset Maugham, I think is his name. But I just love that because I think it really is difficult as I get more and more growth. I just see how many ways you can fall off. And so I love the analogy of the razor's edge. I think it hits the nail on the head.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Talk
No, I
to-
mean, you say that transformation is hard. You mentioned that earlier. I mean, it speaks to how hard the lines of conditioning are laid down. I mean, the psyche isn't as malleable as we think. It's so freaking hard to change habits. And we get these great ideas from reading, from books, but actually doing the work is so much more hard.
Yeah, and I think that's what the mind, heart, will dynamic is, of almost like looking at the energy systems or the chakra systems from not so much the Eastern perspective of like 7 chakras in the body, that's starting at the base chakra, but almost looking at mind, heart, and will as the Western perspective on the energy systems in the body, where you start up at the top in the mind, and then you go to the heart, and then you go to the will, and the will is kind of like your primal, what you do, and that's the hardest one to change your patterns and your behaviors on.
Yeah, I think you're just hitting on 2 super huge things there. Like, I feel like the will, in a way, is your energy to transcend these bad habits. But when you talk about these bad habits, I think a lot of those come from what I was talking about before, is this cleaning up shit. Because we have these huge, all of us, everybody has failures and traumas that are so deep and they're so suppressed and they're so in the body that they're wicked, so hard to get rid of. And Neil Kramer talked about it in his workshop last weekend, called them rocks. He says everyone's got these huge rocks that we can't see, and it's like you can use the analogy of rocks on an ocean, and the best we can do is like the ocean comes by and it starts to slowly erode them, and then sometimes it isn't until the ocean pulls away a little bit that we can even see just how huge they are. But anyways, it's just like so important. But anyways, go ahead.
Well, am I up next on the list? I guess I am, aren't I?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay, so the next one I was going to talk about is a book that was basically written, I think, over 100 years ago. And it was like one of those manuscripts that was like never released with the writer's body of work and was saved till after they died. And it was so controversial, the subject matter in the book, that the family waited to release it until, only like 20 or 30 years ago, because of what it was saying against orthodoxy and religion. So the juiciness of the book is Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill.
And never heard of it.
Yeah, basically, it's Napoleon Hill was obviously one of those kind of earliest person that inspired much of what would later become self-help stuff. And essentially what it was that he put in this book called Outwitting the Devil a framework of using Satan as a metaphor for how all that the devil has to do is basically distract each and every individual from having a clear focus on what they want. And how much of they talk about how much our mental thoughts really can lead to concentration equals manifestation, and how the mind and the power of the mind is so important for structuring what we actually want to have manifest in our life, especially the relationship between the conscious and the subconscious. And if you simply meditate on something, how much you can actually make it happen. And an esoteric element of like belief, to use a Star Wars reference, is when Luke is at the Dagobah system and Yoda lifts the X-Wing, and Luke is like, I can't believe you did that. And Yoda says, that's why you failed. You have to believe things. And so you have to kind of like really concentrate on things and believe that you can make them happen mentally. So in Outwitting the Devil, Napoleon Hill says that all the devil has to do, and using it in this framework of the devil, is distract people from doing these very simple mind-based exercises and meditations to really bring things about in a manifestation way in life. So the whole book is kind of talking about how every single person that doesn't actually concentrate on things mentally, the devil gets their kind of hooves in them and basically distracts. And how many people are basically, you ask them what they want in life and they have at best a foggy picture of what they ultimately really want, right? And so it's all about kind of distracting and dissuading from the basics of these basic practices that have huge spiritual and mental mastery capabilities on what human beings are capable of. So that kind of base concept of the book is really interesting and empowering. And of course, the fact that the book had so much kind of like secret sauce stuff in it was really kind of juicy. And I've always kind of kept that concept as I've gone forward of just not letting yourself get distracted in 10 things. Like you had mentioned, Jonathan, where so many people are always trying to juggle so many things instead of just having a clear, simple goal on like the things that they want and making those things actually happen in a structured, basic, simple way. You distract and you dissuade and you dilute and you polarize and you just keep people from doing these base processes. And that's kind of the metaphor that he used, putting it in this container of the devil. So
That's so great. I mean, we can see that so much in our modern culture, you know, like
yes,
just like, you know, like the MTV culture and the short attention span and everyone wants instant gratification, and it's everywhere. The devil's definitely done a lot of work on our modern society.
Isn't that analogous to Neil Kramer's view of empire, which is, you know, you take away free will and, you know,
time.
And choice, the choice of people, and, you know, what fills that vacuum is called empire, right?
Yeah, and disavow your capabilities. Exactly, and consent to things that you don't realize. And it's all in there. It's all in that kind of kit of parts. A lot of these things kind of have corollaries with things that we've talked about in terms of these books as well, don't they? But
it integrates, right?
yeah, and just to do an honorable mention, because I don't need to really talk about it much, but just to kind of add to this, another book that I had, I don't mean to double up on books, but another book that I have on my list is very similar to Outwitting the Devil, and it's called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. And it's
I've heard of that one.
You're familiar with it. It's very much in a similar concept.
Read it,
where it's basically like the summary of the book is that when you very first see something in the blink of an eye, your impression of something usually goes to your subconscious, so you can get your initial impression of that flower is like, oh my God, that flower is beautiful. And then the more you kind of like spend time with it, the more you can kind of get diluted and lose perspective on it. So it's kind of it's in a similar sense of like your initial impression of something, that very first millisecond is true, and other things can go untrue the more time that you spend with things and the more that you let outside forces influence your opinions and your judgments and your thoughts on something. The book uses this brilliant metaphor of the statue at the Getty Museum that came in, that at the very first moment of seeing the statue, all the art historians thought something looked very strange with it. But as they continued to try and authenticate the statue, everything in the whole gobbledygook of like a 2-year process to authenticate the statue showed them that it was authentic. But the millisecond they first saw it, something was off about it. And of course, later on, it is shown that the statue was a forgery, right? So it's a very interesting concept where that's something that I've retained in life as well, is to not get distracted by things, but also to see like the very first moment you see something or hear something, your very first impression of it, I think, is like a little bit of a adrenaline shot to your subconscious, or maybe what you might call your higher self, of like, hey, this is telling me something. Oh, I feel there's validity in that. I feel that's really great. And then maybe as I'm continually getting outside influence, as I'm reading forums and getting all this other external information telling me about something, and it leads me to think otherwise, always go back to that kind of like the first impression is usually the correct one.
I have two thoughts about that, what you said in the book. So one that really corresponds with like what I was talking about, this meditative state development and the waking up, because it's like what they say the same kind of thing, that like, yeah, as you develop your meditative state, you're actually moving more into your soul, and then you're getting more. You recognize we all have, like, we have a gross animal body, but we also have a soul, and we're also connected to the divine. And it's through these meditative state things we get deeper into these. That's kind of what the window is, and so that's what they're saying is the more you recognize that, the clearer the signal comes from the soul or from the divine. So it's almost kind of like you're saying there is like you're validating that you're saying that's like the first impression might be that more divine one, and the meditative stuff allows you to quiet the mind so that those signals come a lot clearer. So that's one of the big benefits. Another thing I took away from that book, in addition to what you said, was just he's also talked about how like once you get like a ton of expertise in something, like it so well that like you can just see things instantaneously, and that's why some people seem like crazy geniuses, but it's just like the pattern recognition gets so deep with a certain kind of expertise you spend a lot of time to, in a blink you just know. And so that I took that away too. I like that book. That's I like Tipping Point as well. I thought that was a really good book.
And how people are probably controlled by seeing something initially, knowing how they initially feel about it, versus like how he mentions in the book, using this I think it was a Matisse statue or something they were trying to authenticate. Everything, they wanted it to be real, right? So as they went through the whole loop-de-loop of trying to authenticate this thing, everything after their initial impression, they wanted to be real, and they let all these influences from all this carbon dating and all these other kind of influences and all these timelines and maps and tracking the statue and stuff. So yeah, it's looking more at things from external influences versus your divine internal esoteric, kind of calling card on something. So well said, dude. Well,
Thanks.
yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Mike, or do you want to kind of spit out your next one? We'll do maybe another. We'll do one more round here. We'll go around
One more round.
yeah.
Okay. I'll mention my next one, which I think is
do-
probably
Yeah, and do this, dude.
my
Do one
favorite.
more round and then give some honorable mentions, or maybe we'll just do, if there's any more that you have in addition to that, just kind of spit out some honorable mentions, and I've got a
Okay.
yeah.
Do. So this next one is Krishnamurti.
Ooh,
It's called The Awakening of Intelligence. And I
He's
think
awesome.
this may be my favorite book. Did you read that, Jonathan?
I don't think I read that one, but I read one of his books fairly recently. It was good. It was really good. He's a wise man.
Okay. Yeah, he is. So yeah, I mean, at a young age, he got kind of wrapped into this Theosophical Society. He got actually adopted by one of the founders. But then he had these like spiritual breakthroughs in his 20s, and he ended up breaking away from the Theosophical Society and just started to travel and teach on his own all the way until his death in 1986. And this book, The Awakening of Intelligence, was published a year after his death, and it's basically a collection of dialogues, Q&A, that he had with some with notable people like David Bohm. He's a famous physicist, but it's also a collection of lectures he gave to small and large audiences. But most of the book is in question and answer form. And this guy was unique. He covered so many topics in these lectures and discussion, and he never gave the questioner, a gift-wrapped answer. Instead, give them a rope to hang themselves pretty often. He would, rebuke them about how shallow or unthoughtful their question was. And he really challenged people to think very deeply about the problems in their own lives and in the world. And when I read this book, and I still pick it up from time to time, I always get this feeling that I'm on some sort of hallucinogen, because it's total immersion. It's really peaceful reading. And I wonder why. I mean, what I concluded is that the way he speaks, he focuses a lot on the nature of the mind. And he also focuses on taking away the element of time and space and the need for people to become an observer, especially of the mind, but also of everything around you. And when we ponder the problems and the nature of reality. So he speaks in this step-by-step way when he's answering these questions to lead the listener to, a deep meditative state, and he strives to get to the primal root of each question that's raised. So, when I reading his words, he creates this discourse. I find myself sinking into almost a meditative state when I'm reading, which is unique. I mean, I don't usually do that with books.
Do you feel like it's that kind of layered text or that compressed text where you can continuously read it over and over again and always get juicy info out of it with each new read?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
beautiful.
in a way, he's like, he covers so many topics. He's kind of like Manly Hall, where he just, he covers everything from, why did you choose the career you did, to what does freedom mean? What does human freedom mean? He just goes on these, step by step, just kind of narrowing the path to, where the answer kind of comes up organically. So it's a beautiful book to just kind of, and you can, you have to read it pick a chapter. It doesn't have to be read from cover to cover.
That's beautiful. I love the nonlinear element of books too. And I find that I write really well when I kind of don't set things in a structured order. It's just like put down this chunk or this essay or this chapter, and it doesn't have to be this massive piece of literary, again, not massive long thing. Or like anytime in the few screenplays I've written, I always find it like difficult to just kind of put stuff in a linear long order. It's nicer if it's just kind of like you can open a page and get concepts out of anything, and it could have been in any sort of order.
Right.
It's
Right.
very non-linear, but it's probably also nice too. One thing that I've been doing, a habit that I've been adopting, and I know that we all love audiobooks, is listening to things at faster speeds than you normally would. And I've gotten a lot better at listening things to even double speed. Because Krishnamurti, oh my God, that guy was a Snorville in his presentation. He was not a bard poet like Terence McKenna. Even Manly P. Hall, there was definite like some snoriness to the presentation, and McKenna was such a good presenter. But Krishnamurti had such beautiful material, but man, the delivery was like it was like going to the public library and sitting there, So maybe reading Krishnamurti at double speed is the way to do it.
Reading is probably better than listening in. So, okay, so I'll mention. I had one more.
Yeah, go
and then
ahead.
An
Spit
honorable
it- yeah.
mention. So the last one was I had to pick a book by Carl Jung.
Oh, wow.
His ability to tackle topics that push into the unknown is,
Stratospheric.
yeah, I mean, he's able to articulate concepts that are really hard to grasp, and that just fascinates me. So I picked a really thin book. It's only 100 pages. It's called The Undiscovered Self. And
Beautiful.
yeah, I think you guys are familiar with the expression "know thyself," that was on the
Oracle
Temple of
Delphi.
Apollo, Delphi. Yeah.
Yep.
2,700 years ago. If there's one expression that could be used to characterize this book, it's that know
Beautiful.
thyself. So that's I mean, there's some themes in there, like he teaches like what the recognition of what control means. He focused on church and state as two means of control. Both
Yes.
he said were architected to inspire fear and terrorize people.
Right. Right.
And this mass thinking makes people blind and causes them to be unable to have personal interactions. But he also focused on man's uniqueness, and he described man, the human, as a unique phenomenon that can't be compared to anything else. I mean, anatomically, we have legs and arms, and just like animals, but the psyche is different in every single human.
Mm-hmm.
And he really dove deep into that in the book. And then lastly, he talked about the necessary connection to our unconscious in attaining self-knowledge.
And that is so Jungian, isn't it? It's funny when certain people have these concepts, much like Stanley Kubrick had these Kubrickian kind of flavors, that what you just said is very much a Jungian thing, where it's almost like you expand and unpack a concept so well in your body of your work that it becomes like associated with your name, like
Right.
the unconscious of Jung.
Yeah, I mean, he looked at the unconscious as this iceberg that was mostly underwater, and we had to tap into that to kind of understand ourselves.
Yep. And my colleague on Shamans of the Global Village, Rack, has done so much with like tryptamine spaces, realizing that the real way that you actually access them, and you can only get so far as an individual, and ultimately you must go in groups to get to the furthest places of kind of what he calls like the event horizon of deep source. So I think in the sense of collective unconscious too, it's like as the species becomes more in line with what they should be doing, we realize that we should be going in places together, and it's about the journey, and it's about that fellowship. It's about that union of knowing that you can do that with your tribesmen, and you can go to these great places, and that collectively there's so much power to us when we realize that we're all, doing things together in the right vibratory way, in the positive light, in a conscious back and forth. So,
Yep.
yeah.
So that was the last one. I'll just mention one more, and I won't go into detail. So this one had quite an influence on me. It's called The Phenomenon of Man by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah.
And I'll just mention that as one that's really interesting kind of meta theme, that evolution is, a process that leads to increasing complexity. And he introduced that concept of the noosphere, this
Right.
new kind of layer of human thought and consciousness that is on top of all the physical layers that we see.
I'll make a master list of all these, even the ones that we've mentioned, just so that we can all make sure that each one of us have read all of them.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Do you want to go into your any honorable mentions you might have, Jonathan? And then, dude, go ahead and mention the arc, man, while we're on this, while we're doing this podcast.
All right. Well, I'll do three things very succinctly. I want to just talk a little bit about a little more about this collective unconscious thing that Mike was talking about, or unconscious. I'll talk about the arc, and I'll talk about some books really fast. So just quickly on to piggyback off of Mike's thing and this waking up thing, I just wanted to. I've discovered this kind of path that this unconscious, individual unconscious, and I think there's a parallel that, because the micro is the macro with this collective unconscious. So I've kind of discovered, like, through like this class I took a while called the Landmark Forum, and in this class they teach you that every human has this huge first major failure in our life, and during this failure we make up something really nasty about ourselves. We blame ourselves, and we suppress the shit out of that, and then we do something to overcompensate it. So we have this core wound, and then we create this false self to totally overcompensate for it, and we suppress that, and then that dominates our life so much, and we don't even see it, can't see it, and it's super difficult to get rid of. But the good news is you can lessen it, and I've kind of really discovered that path. And so the thing is that people tend to want to hate on that part of themselves, but the thing is to realize is that this part of the self that's really hurting you actually helped you at an earlier point in your life. Like you created this shadow thing to help you in your time of need, this overcompensation. But then as you get older, it's still there, and we don't need it anymore. So you kind of have to go through this process of completely understanding what happened to you, really appreciating how this helped you. So you can't hate on it to get rid of it. You actually have to appreciate it and love it for the good, and then forgive it for the bad. It's not about it's really about compassion, and then you can release it. And also you have to develop a new way of coping that you didn't have at this younger age. So that's just a model for people who really want to get into the shadow stuff. And I encourage people to go there, because we say how the state suffocates us, but it's nothing compared to how much our own consciousness suffocates us and limits us. And the shadow is a big part of that. And I think the shadow government in the same thing. I think there was a crisis a long time ago where we needed authority to tell us what to do, and we created them, and then they're just still there thinking that we still need us, and they're not as bad as we think they are. They just don't know that we don't need this yet, and we have to figure that all out. That's a whole unfolding. But anyway, so that's that. So that's all I want to say about that. So then the arc. Oh, okay. Well, specifically the term the arc actually comes from Mark Passio, who has a huge library of esoteric books and stuff. And if you send him a hard drive, I don't know if he's still doing this.
I'm looking at the website, and the page is still there, so maybe it's still going on.
Yeah. So he will actually give you a whole bunch of stuff from esoteric for free. All you have to do is get a hard drive. You have to mail it to him, and also pay for the postage, and he'll transfer it over and send it back. But actually, the information I sent you, Niles, was not the arc. It was something I got off a Mega Buster or something. But
right,
yeah,
because I'm noticing the arc is not just prose. It's also he's saying there's audio and video files in here too. So what you sent me was essentially a massive, insane dump of books, old school, out of print books that was just. I've been going through it since you gave it to me, and I have 10 years to go to finish it all.
Yeah, exactly. At least 10 years. Are you kidding me? That was 70 gigabytes of ebooks or something crazy like that.
Right.
So it was a massive dump. I mean, but it's very useful to have, and you can pull stuff out here and there. All right, so I'll just list some books. All I'm going to say is the name of the book, the author, and a one sentence about why I liked it.
Sure.
And there's a book called Anti-Fragile by Taleb, and it's just about like how to make things so that they don't break, how to develop systems they don't break. Really great book. Internet of Money by Andreas Antonopoulos. It's really about the blockchain technology that underpins Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Really awesome. Autobiography of a Yogi, which is by it's basically a great book about just getting more exposure into light unveilings and how far you can go. And another book on that like that is called Sri Aurobindo and the Adventures of the Consciousness. And it's really, he's like a meditator and an Indian guru who just went super far, and you can just get a glimpse of like what it's like to really do that. Many Lives, Many Masters is a fascinating book about past lives, about how like a Western psychiatrist had like a patient who like got into like past lives. That's a real easy read. I highly recommend that. It's really eye-opening. I think Carlos Castaneda, especially his like first 4 books, really easy read, really cool about esoteric stuff. Eastern Body, Western Minds, a really cool book about the chakras and merging it with like modern psychology. Tragedy and Hope, the ebook, is like an abridged version of the like 1200, 1400 tragedy book about like like all that happened, about like the real like research that Georgetown professor did, Quigley, about the elites. Incognito is a really cool book about it's totally about biology, but it talks about how our body has all these like systems that like run together kind of unconsciously, and then sometimes they're in conflict. Really, really good read. Tantra Illuminated is a really good book about Kashmir Shaivism. It's one of the clearest, most easy to read book about like about ultimate reality and higher meditative states. This guy's an amazing writer, and he's talking about real deep stuff. Just 2 more, The Power of the Myth by Joseph Campbell, about just this myth thing about overcoming things. And there's an interview I think he does with what's his face, that interviewer on PBS. It is really good. And lastly, there's a book called The Presence Process, which is amazing for getting at shadow work and dealing with suppressed emotions. It's really a how-to book. It's got a very simple meditation about how you can get really present, and it allows shit to come up and you can process it. And anyways, that's my list.
Yeah, beautiful. And then I have a list. I've kind of assembled a reading list too over a few years that I haven't really ever released publicly. So if somebody's interested in that, it's got kind of 35 of the most influential books on my life in it. And I think that are
Cool.
I can always kind of give that out to anybody that wants to contact me directly. So this is great, gentlemen. This is a beautiful way to do this. I think it's nice to do this loop to loop, and it allows us to kind of talk about certain areas and just kind of go down various paths through these specific things that in the early part of our spiritual processes. So this has been great.
Yeah. Thanks for putting it together, Niles. It was definitely a worthwhile exercise thinking about what's influenced me over my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's always delightful to have you both and have these chats. So this has been another fun one to check off on the list.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot, man. This is fun. I really love this platform. And yeah, Niles, you do a really great job of making very comfortable and easy for us to talk. And Mike, and it's also just interesting to hear from you guys and how we each come in at our own perspective. And my reading list has grown.
Exactly, because we each mentioned other things that we had probably not read all of them. So now we've got more reading to do for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
there's a couple great books out there, okay? One is by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. That teaches specifically some techniques. So it's not as important, but it's a great book. I'll use this as an example. I go to people, have you read the Dale Carnegie book? Oh yeah, I read that. Oh, so you know, yeah, I know it all, I read it. When did you read it? Oh, I read that too. Well, I read that about 25 years ago. I go, you know, they redid the whole book, you should read it again. Of course, they haven't read that, it's the same book. Guy reads it and goes, oh my God, yeah, they redid the whole book. It's like a brand new book. It's the same book, Charlie. You're different. You can't, it's like people say, oh, I read a book once. I listened to a CD once. I went to a seminar once. Really? If I said, hey, let's go to dinner tonight, you wouldn't say, oh, no, it's okay. I ate once in my life, 20 years ago. You eat every day. You feed your body every day. You got to feed your mind every day because you're growing. Your mind is growing just like your body. It needs new information every day. Take that back. It needs information every day, even if it's the same, because it becomes new every time you listen to it or read it or observe it or do it. You make a souffle 1,000 times. Every time you make it, it's a new experience. And you're learning something new every time you do it. Every time you throw a punch, the monk taught me, it's a new experience. You're learning something new every single time. You're adding to what you knew, you're adding something new because you're a new person. Now, by the way, when you're in societies, how is the training actually given to one another? It's actually not done in classrooms. It is done in some workshops such as this, some seminars and some lectures, absolutely. A lot of the information, however, is taught to you via books where you actually have to read things. Now, the reason I point that out is today, very few people read. And one of the interesting decisions made by society members, and this has been throughout history, by the way, is when you have the elite class who have information, they want to keep that information to themselves so that they do not have competition. Throughout the history of the world, the ruling classes, the elite class of people that had this knowledge, they wanted to keep the knowledge to themselves so they didn't have competition. The way to do that was, first and foremost, keep the masses illiterate. If we can keep the masses unable to read, then we will keep them outside of this ability to get this knowledge, which is one of the reasons why in schools around the world, reading levels are continuing to go down. Now, throughout history, the majority of the population was illiterate. In today's society, we have schools, so we think, oh, everybody can read and write. It's not really true. In America, for example, phonics, which was taught in all schools, was taken out of the schools and replaced with a method called the look-see method. And this makes sure that kids can't really read. So reading is diminishing over time. It's going down, 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 down. So we learn this information within the societies primarily from reading. And reading is something that is really overlooked. But knowledge that comes through reading is quite different than through any other method. Leaders are always readers. If you look at the leaders of countries around the world, if you look at the billionaires around the world, if you look at the captains of industry around the world, they always are massive readers. They read, read, read all the time. Now think about that. I mentioned to you that I learned this information, and information is shared within societies primarily through reading. So when you see somebody who is a ferocious reader, ask yourself, I wonder if he's a society member, because that's one of the things that we're taught. And that's one of the things that we're trained to do very early on, is to read and gather information through reading. So reading is really important of how we get this information. The societies, as I mentioned, are kind of common knowledge, but it's really what goes on inside the societies that have always been kept a secret. Hey, I'm Senator John Kerry, and I'm a member of Skull and Bones. Okay, what goes on? Well, I can't tell you. It's a secret. I'm a 33-degree member of the Freemasons. I'll let you know that. That's okay. Benjamin Franklin was a member of the Freemasons, a 33-degree member. Throughout history, our leaders were 33-degree members. They were proud of that membership. They used to wear their Masonic garb in public. They were proud of membership. But when you ask them what went on inside, what did you learn, that's when it stopped. That's when, no. I'll let you know that I'm a member, but not what I learned as a member.